All right, so now we're going to start talking about the different kinds of hazards, starting with biological hazards and controls, actually. And I want to make that known because we are going to get into the weeds a little bit about this, but within the biological hazards and really all of them. But you need to understand, try to kind of maintain this 30,000 foot view, and I'll try to, express the material in that way such that you don't get in the weeds, because you get in the weeds, then you start not understanding it. I don't want to lose you. But the big key here is to just understand that, we got to look into the hazards and know what they are such that we can control them. And so we get those characteristics and we'll move forward with it. If you already know the types of biological hazards that your current facility has, then you can take notes specifically for those and get all the details and stuff like that. But just kind of be mindful of that. Don't get so far into the weeds that you lose yourself and, it's just not effective at all. So there's a difference between pathogens and spoilage organisms. Pathogens contain a potential health hazard, right? There's a potential health hazard when you are ingesting pathogens. Now, when you talk about spoilage organisms, they're not biological hazards. They may affect the quality, but they're not going to cause a potential health issue. And an example of that is yeast and mold. Looking at the numbers now, you see it's dated back in 2011. However, this gives you an understanding of what the impact of food safety hazards or foodborne illnesses specifically have on us as a country. And we're looking at to the tune of 48 million type of different cases per year, leading all the way to about 3,000 fatalities, 128,000 deaths. So, I mean, relatively speaking, I would say that's a substantial number, right? Like that's, it really speaks to. I mean, it's not always a HACCP plan, right? That falls in that place. Like maybe people are just eating food that's not good, right? It's not the shelf. Let's pass its shelf life, but we need to continue to do our part, and that's why we're here. We need to do our part in understanding what these foodborne illness causes are, so that we can prevent them further down the line. And then you got to think about, like, there's an actual number and a reported number of foodborne diseases disease outbreaks throughout, and those are two different numbers. And depending on the type of foodborne illness, depending on how new it is and how much we know about the foodborne illness, that will determine that discrepancy. So we look at these kind of outbreaks. Most of them have come from animal origin, right? And as of recently, though, we've seen such an uptick in the increasing amount of outbreaks that have come from fruits and vegetables, right? So you probably know of some. If you big fan of Chipotle, they had one back in the quite a few years ago, but not too long ago. It rebounded since, but I think Subway had one. And it was like, lettuce, I think it was one, and it was a tomato. We've had cantaloupe. We've had peanut butter. We've had, trying to think if there are some others, but we've had quite a few outbreaks lately. And so that has tightened the clamps on, controlling this stuff, especially upstream. Because once again, you start distributing that stuff, you got to make sure that we're getting the clamps on it early enough such that it doesn't impact us on a higher level. So steps to cause illness. So you got a pathogen or toxin present in the food. In order for the pathogen to grow, it has to grow in high enough numbers to produce some type of infection or toxin. All right. So different pathogens have different toxic levels, so different levels that are going to affect you. One thing we need to know: parasites and viruses do not grow in foods, right? So you think about the COVID. I had a conversation with somebody about COVID, right? Because that's obviously one of the most recent issues that we've had lately, but it's not a foodborne illness. It does not grow in food. Food must be ingested and survive digestive tract barriers. And some pathogens must establish and multiply in the body in order to get that kind of effect. Places where illness is acquired. So most commonly the food service establishments and group feeding situations. You know why? The reason why that happens in those areas is because it's post kill. And what that means is after the food is pretty much ready to be consumed, there's a lot of handling of it, right? So usually when you start processing food, this HACCP plan is, while it's difficult, it's a tedious task. It's so much easier to manage HACCP, manage the food safety and definitely the biological hazards when you are making the food, and not after, right? So if it goes, think about it, if it goes through a heating step of some sort, that happens at where it's being processed. It doesn't happen at a food service establishment. Food service establishment doesn't have any type of systems in place outside of, like, put refrigeration, temperature control type stuff, in order to, keep biological hazards out. And so once you have it there and you add, put it in the perfect conditions, depending on that biological hazard, you're going to run into some issues. So that's why, you have it most commonly in these areas. All right, so now we're taking a look at the top 5 pathogens contributing to domestically acquired foodborne illnesses. And so you see norovirus leads. Behind it is salmonella, perfringens, campylobacter, and then staph.